Welcome to the second installment of Power Huddle, Inside the Mind of ESG Gurus. I'm Heidi Friedman, a partner at Thompson Hine and co-chair of our ESG Collaborative, which is our ESG practice group here. During this monthly series, I chat one-on-one with ESG executives. These unscripted discussions will examine how these company executives from various industries and from public and private companies are paving the way as ESG trendsetters in championing pragmatic ESG strategies to align with business values while building a sustainability framework to advance their company's ESG goals and policies. Joining me today is Susan Lester. Susan is now Senior Director, ESG at Otis Worldwide Corporation, the world's largest provider of escalators, elevators, and all moving walkways. Susan provides counsel through leadership and trend spotting on absolutely all aspects of ESG and sustainability against Otis's global platform. And before joining Otis, where Susan's been for just a few months, she had created the ESG program at McDonald's. So she'll have some interesting things about that comparison to talk about. A few of the boring things. Today's program is being recorded and will be available to view in our library of recording on Thompson Hine's YouTube channel. This presentation is intended for general information only of individuals and organizations on matters of current interest. The thoughts and opinions being expressed today are those of the individual panel members only, and do not really reflect the opinions of the panel members' clients, employers, affiliates, or Thompson Hine. The content should not be taken as advice, as the views expressed are for informational purposes only. I really want to encourage you to get involved in the discussion today and put a question in the chat. I'd be happy to address it and share it with Susan, and hopefully we can make this a little bit more of an interactive discussion. So with that, Susan, welcome. Thanks for joining us. I'm really excited to chat ESG with you, one of our favorite topics.
Yes, thanks, Heidi.
So why don't you tell us, introduce yourself a little bit more and tell us about your ESG journey, which is really an interesting one.
Yeah, so one of the things I love about ESG is I think as you meet folks in the field, everyone came to it from a different perspective or a different journey. I actually, was an IP litigator when I started out, and then worked in McDonald's marketing and IP group, where I was working on commercials, promotions, sweepstakes, a lot of our food claims. And with that, it got me into knowing more about our supply chain, nutrition, and some of the topics that would then touch the ESG space. And through that work, ESG often was a corner of my desk in some capacity, as well as many other of the colleagues at McDonald's touching it because of the different subject matter expertise. As that continued, to grow, saw ESG grow at all companies, and just in talking about how you handle it, a few colleagues and I thought that we really needed to have at least one person in legal dedicated to ESG, at least thinking about it all the time. And so that was a proposal that a few of us who touched the space really pushed for, and was a role that I was fortunate to have the opportunity to take when it was first created, which was Global Senior Counsel of ESG at McDonald's. And so within that role, it happened in about 2021. So it's about 2 to 3 years of my last experience at McDonald's, but it really happened at the time when everything else was converging to. It was ESG regulations popping up, talks of the SEC just starting, governance discussions happening. And so what really started from my background is claims work and looking at how we're talking about what you say in the ESG space, and very much from the FTC perspective, really expanded into all areas of the governance, regulation, disclosures. How do the pieces come together? And I think for me, it was been an interesting journey. It was an interesting perspective because I hadn't been so much involved with corporate governance before, but at the end of the day, in my opinion, whether we were saying an advertisement or a filing, it really was claims substantiation work. And that's a lot of what my bread and butter had been. And I think what, attracted me to the space, as well as, ESG, you feel like you get to make a difference, right? They are issues that are impacting us in the world, or someone who has kids. It makes an exciting piece to be a part of, and contributing some of those areas that are a part of ESG.
Yeah. What's that you can do well by doing good, or do good by doing one of those two things. So, and now I can give you credit for those cool Monopoly sweepstake things at McDonald's. I'm not sure if I knew about that. So,
Yeah, Monopoly was not one I worked on, but there was definitely a lot of cool initiatives that came out while I was there.
yeah, one of the things you're saying, Susan, is really true, which is ESG is not new. I think that's what some people say, oh, it's this new thing. And it's not at all. I mean, I've been practicing environmental law for almost 30 years. And what we used to talk about as sustainability is certainly one of the three foundational legs of ESG. And it just sort of ebbs and weaves. And now I feel like the ESG umbrella is so broad that it actually can encompass everything. And you really need to, have a cross collaborative approach to it. And I think you have been really good at putting those kinds of approaches together. Talk a little bit about what you might think is your biggest ESG success.
Oh, that's a tough one. Because I think what also is really fascinating about ESG is it really is, like you said, Heidi, so collaborative, right? So many people are coming together to execute on it, whether it's the goal a company has set or the ESG report. I think for me, if I had to look at it, I just would say I'm just proud of stepping into a new area and trying to learn that and kind of going forward with that on my career, which is much more personal than necessarily what's out there as success of ESG. But I think it is there's so many successes, and I think when you work for a company, that's the exciting part. If you get to see the teams who really contribute, whether it's your environmental teams or the social teams who may have a program they want to work on, and you got to help them get there, right? And that collaboration, I think, just really feeds into, I think, the enjoyable part of ESG, because sometimes in the legal world as lawyers, not all aspects of it are collaborative, right? If you're in litigation or that side of it, but it's truly a space where many folks in it really want to contribute and do the right thing. And that's what I think really is what I enjoy about it. I think kind of goes into that success part of feeling like you're making that difference.
Yeah. And you, I mean, you're actually setting goals and making changes and guiding companies through doing that, which I think is my kids are old, you have little kids. So hopefully by the time your kids are my kids' age, things will be looking a lot better than they are these days. So, and obviously along with that collaboration and comprehensive goal setting and all of that, comes a lot of challenges. You and I were laughing before we started here with, look how far we came without any regulation, right? And now we kind of have everything coming at us. We have California, but what does that mean? We have all these other things. So what would what's your biggest challenge, on top of just like, basically things changing every minute, but specifically what in the ESG realm, what do you think your biggest challenge is?
Yeah, I think there's several buckets within that, and all of them, though, the common theme is in intersectionality and how do you bring it together. And regulations, whether you're a global company or not, it's how do you look at all of the emerging regulations and how do they fit together? How do you determine it? And in a space too, when regulations are coming out, but maybe they then can come out with the guidance, more directive guidance a year after that, right? And how do you take that cipher, advise, and do the right prioritization of figuring out when, we maybe need to take this action or that action, and how they overlap or don't overlap, right? That intersectionality. I think that goes hand in hand too with some of what's being seen in the ESG rating space, right? They started out for a purpose when there wasn't as many, and now there's quite a few. And how do you evaluate them? How do you look at them when they're looking at different evaluations or on top of each other in the same, and put that together with, the plans and how it fits? So again, many things intersecting at once. And I think those are some of the common themes of the third bucket too. You and I were talking a little bit before we started, Heidi, of there's so many vendors and tools in this space, which may not necessarily come up as the first thought of the legal challenge, but how do you wade through those and figure out which one is the best or can really do what it says, right? The amount of requests you get in the space of what type of company can help you with that analysis, or what do you need them to do? How do you manage your data? It's just because it is so emerging, a lot of that comes with those challenges of almost wading through the space too, I think, as you're formulating some of these thoughts and ideas of the other areas that are just going on in the ESG industry.
Yeah. I mean, I heard someone else said the other day, I just pray for consistency across the globe at some point,
Right,
which is, it's never really consistent globally, nationally, and then on the state
right.
and local level. I mean, that's going to be difficult. So we're going to have to kind of pick one and decide where we go. But I think Susan was also mentioning when she was saying the challenges. So California enacts these four different regulations relating to ESG reporting and other things, but CARB is the entity that's going to set out the guidance of what you really need to do. So we have a lot of companies kind of, putting up their hands saying what's going to be needed when, but yet we have to wait to find out what this even means, to be honest.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the challenge. And we certainly get, I don't know, what were we saying, 10 to 15 emails a day each with someone trying to sell us something, but we don't want to be missing something wonderful like a great data amalgamation service or something like that. But it is really hard
Right.
to tune out the noise here and focus on it. So,
Mm-hmm.
and I think you use the word claim substantiation
Yeah.
as the foundation of so many different things you've done, and especially ESG. I love that because I feel like sometimes our advice is so simplistic. Someone will send us their ESG report, have us look at it. It's usually, do you have the data for this? How did you say that? It's just asking pretty simplistic questions. But we obviously want to balance what we're saying against the risk of these greenwashing claims.
Right.
And the data around that is they're just skyrocketing. What's your view on balancing that risk? What have you seen in the greenwashing space, and how are you kind of focusing your strategy to mitigate that risk?
Yeah, so when, I think of claim substantiation, and certainly, two different industries where advertising is more prevalent in one than the other. But at the end of the day, I try to remind myself, whoever's bringing me a claim, everyone's intending to say the right thing, right? I don't think anyone is really intending to mislead or say anything wrong. And so to me, I always look at it with the client or whoever I'm working with of just a conversation of help me understand what allowed you to say this. And then we can work through whether or not that matches the specific guidelines that the FTC has set out, or what we're seeing in the industry of how folks have maybe interpreted one way or another. And so I always try to think of it from that perspective. I think too, clearly it's on the FTC's mind too, is they're looking at finalizing their greenwashing, or not
They're green
greenwashing,
guides. Yeah,
their
they're
green
updated.
guides,
Yeah.
which are solely needed updated, because those
Yeah.
I believe were like 10 years old. And that's a
Yeah.
challenge in an ever emerging space, is if you have guidelines out there that aren't updated, it can make it a real big challenge too, if it's not keeping up with the technology or terminology that consumers may have become more familiar with. So while we'll get the update here, I think that's still going to be a constant challenge of how do you keep, claim guidance updated in this area where technology is changing often, of how you can do certain aspects, right? Or how you can, and how consumers get smarter in the space. I
Mm-hmm.
think it's an interesting trend, as you said too, Heidi, when you look at it globally, right? As U.S. lawyers, consumer class actions always been the nature of our philosophy of, oh no, could this happen or not? But you're
Mm-hmm.
even seeing that pick up in some markets and countries who used to never see consumer class actions. I think Italy, for example, had its, this might have been last year, but had its
Yeah.
first consumer class action, and it was a greenwashing one. So I think it's something that is an area we're still going to have to watch and see. It's hot right now. And so I think it is getting those attention from those who typically challenge in this space. But we'll see where it goes, as I think companies all looking at how do we talk about this. And we want people to know what we're doing in the space, because, because it is important.
Yeah, absolutely. And the best advice we always talk about is put your head in the consumer as a
Yeah.
consumer. What would they believe or rely on
Mm-hmm.
based on what you're saying? And
Yes.
you have the data to back it up. So it's actually, again, kind of a simplistic concept, but it can reduce your risk fairly
Right.
significantly by looking at that. So I agree with you too that it's becoming more of a global issue. Interestingly, there's been a lot of motions to dismiss those claims that have been granted, though.
Right.
So
There have been.
the court might be a good backstop for that, and we're definitely all waiting for the FTC green guides. The update was supposed to be 2022, but they barely got the comments in by that, and
Right.
there's no projection of when those are going to come out.
But I think you're right. That's been very interesting to see from the trends, because and I think it's good to see and read that the courts, at least in similar ones we've seen,
Mhm.
are taking a reasonable approach, right? And
Yes.
really thinking of when it's the consumer, a reasonable consumer, versus maybe some of the challenges that have been made.
Yeah, more to come on that for sure. So, just a reminder, feel free to put your questions in the chat. We'd love to hear from you and happy to answer them. So one of the most interesting things to me is you have now taken the head ESG role at two very different companies in two very different industries. And I'm just curious what your observations are, going from, obviously the food industry for McDonald's to now a manufacturing industry at Otis.
Yeah, so, a few things. One, I mean, of course, depending on the industry you're in, I think some of the focus areas of where a company may be doing its ESG work changes just because of the nature of the business. So that is a difference of where or not you may be focusing or where their goals may be. But what I found fascinating, again, I've only been in my role for about 3 months now. So everyone's been very welcoming and I'm learning a lot about a new industry, but also some things have stayed the same in the ESG space, right? And that again goes back to that collaboration, even industry wide, that I really like about this space is the companies, no matter the industry, some of the considerations you have to take or the brainstorming you have to do in order to talk about climate or this topic or that topic are the same. It's, you're experts in environment or GHG emissions, and those calculations may be the same. There's differences, of course, because of the industry, but there are a lot of similarities, or every company, no matter the industry you're in, are looking at regulations, right? Now, again, some have sector specific requirements here or there, but it's been interesting to see that there are a lot of the similarities. And I think it speaks to at the heart of what ESG is, which goes back to what I already said many times, is really wanting to try to tackle some of the issues of today and do what's right. And at the heart of it, that's where you see some of the similarities. I think no matter the industry you're in, course, each with their unique perspective on it. But that has been something I've noticed so far. And we'll see. As I continue on
Right.
the journey, there might be more insights on that.
Yeah, and I'll be honest that we were seeing a big difference between public and private, even,
Mm-hmm.
across industry, maybe not. But now we're actually seeing the private companies having the same challenges as the public
Yeah.
companies. And most of that is coming from what we call the flow down effect, right? So the public companies are gearing up for the SAC compliance and their stakeholder goals, and they're pushing things down to
Mm-hmm.
their value chain. And the private companies that might be they might be their public companies might be the customers, and so
Right.
it's really everyone's facing the same thing, but
Well,
I feel
and I
like the
believe,
resource issue might be
yeah.
different. Yeah.
And I believe CSRD is
Yeah.
it's not just public companies, but you're right. With some of the requirements when you go into value chain, it impacts, your customers, you as a customer. And so that's again where you see many of the folks in this need to work together because it's impacting all of you. And how do you figure out this game that is often constantly changing?
Yeah, tell us a little bit more about the value chain. So you talked a little bit at the beginning about your previous roles with that. Talk just a little bit about your view on how those pieces outside the company fit into the whole portfolio of ESG.
Yeah, and it's an area that I'm still learning some on too. So I will say it's one that I rely a lot on our subject matter experts to help me along the journey, especially our supply chain counterparts, no matter where I've been, help explain to me. But supply chains can be already so massive in order, whether you're providing food or parts or manufacturing. But I think where some of the regulations gone is the value chain is sort of expanding the traditional supply chain. And so that's a piece that, constantly evaluating and looking at of what exactly is meant by that and how do you go downstream or upstream, I believe is how CSRD frames it in some of the expanding definitions it has there. And so I think it's really figuring out ways of how do you work collaboratively, how do you get information you may need from each other and working through those pieces of it. So is one that I'm still learning a lot about, but really, and again, it goes back to being collaborative with so many different functions in an organization, such as really bringing in supply chain along the journey, who can be, fabulous leaders in the space and helping you along.
Yeah. Yeah. That partnership and the whole contract process and what's in there in terms of expectations and
Yeah.
what's the consequences, that those are important things to look at. So the other thing that there's an uptick in for sure is anti-ESG.
Mm-hmm.
So I would say the number one thing we're hearing a lot about right now is getting calls relating to diversity, equity, inclusion, some challenges that have faced companies and firms on that, but also just whether or not green hushing is more of a trend where people are afraid or companies are afraid to say things. And my perspective, at least from all of our clients that we've talked to, is that that's not happening. People might be changing the names around things a little bit, but the concepts, goals, thresholds, they're all still there, and they're all still critical to the stakeholders moving forward. So what are your thoughts on the anti-ESG momentum that we're seeing a little bit and how that impacts companies?
Yeah, and this is just my personal take on it,
Sure.
or personal opinion is, I think it's one of those that, again, because ESG is newer, it's always been around, but newer in terms of catching attention, that of course some of these on both sides are going to come up and try to attack it because you can do it.
Mhm.
I don't think though that's going to make it go away. I think there's still great work being done here, and folks are going to still make decisions to do what's important to them, important to their companies. I think ESG is very important to business strategies and a lot of that as the world and the business is changing. So me personally, I think we'll get through it. I think it may, anti-ESG, who knows where it will go, but it's one of those that's we're going to watch and see. But ESG's been through a lot, no matter what terms it's been through, no matter how companies have talked about it in the past, going back several years.
Yeah.
And it changes if and when it needs to, but I'm not sure that's the case here. I think it's just focusing on doing what makes sense for that company in that space, and what they're, focusing on.
Right. I mean, I think when I was talking to Megan last week, I think she said having an authentic program
Mm-hmm.
that really aligns with the business value of the company and is what is important to that
Yeah.
company is what's important. It's not a one size fits all thing.
No.
That's not going to shift just because of some tension around things, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the other thing I think you've done really well, and we've talked about stakeholders quite a bit because kind of putting these programs together. The best practice is definitely to do. We like to call them prioritization assessments because the
Yeah.
term materiality in the legal world is very
Yes.
scary. But you take your stakeholder input and try to analyze it and help that feed what your business values are, should be, could be, etc. Talk a little bit about best practices you have put in place at any of the positions that you held or personally to deal with all the stakeholders in the business, because there are so many different buckets of
Yeah,
those.
there are. And at least for me, because I've, first some of these topics were new to me when I first got into ESG, and now, with a new company. But what I find to be the best is I just really try to build those relationships and really hear all the different perspectives and do a lot of listening sessions. And then continue to go back with questions and further on it, but take that time to really hear those perspectives, right? Especially coming in to a new role where many people have, been doing great work on it, and just hear from them what their perspectives are, what they're thinking, and then try to find the best way to, maybe if we need to have further discussions or kind of align the different perspectives to discuss, whatever decision might be needing made, of where do we go from there. But to me, a lot of it comes back to building that relationship. And I have found
Yeah.
just taking the time to hear folks on those issues can really make a difference, rather than if you have to go through it quickly. And I mean, I've been fortunate wherever I've worked, had amazing colleagues and partners, where it's been really easy to build those relationships. But I think too, trying to remember, most people want the same thing in this space. It's just trying to balance the different thoughts on it and the different functions it may impact, and how do you bring that together for the story that's needed, or that item that you may want to accomplish. And I think, governance generally in ESG, many companies have, set up different processes and formalities now to sort of help those discussions and bring those functions together.
So one last question for you, since I know you're mostly all ESG all the time, and one of the things I just have to highlight is when we were talking before, and you mentioned today that I really love the fact that your commitment to this space is also based on the fact that you're a mom, a working mom, and someone who's trying to make the world better for her kids. I certainly relate to that. That's something that I've tried to do. Everyone always says, "Oh, you're an environmental lawyer. That's wonderful." And then they're like, "Oh, not that kind." Okay. So being in the ESG space is so proactive, and I love that too. But aside from the working mom piece that we've talked about, what do you do in your free time? What do you like to, I'm guessing spending time with your kids, but what else do you do to keep yourself sane and happy, Susan?
Yeah, I mean, I would say right now it is just my kids, 3 and 6, which I'm sure many on the call can relate to, where their activities. My oldest started first grade. The activities skyrocketed that want to be involved with or attend, whether it be the soccer, the dance, or whatever else is going on, like Halloween. I'm sure many others feel right now. There's like 5 different activities a day that you're supposed to keep track of, and so it's really been just spending time with them, which I know is not necessarily always the fun answer. What's your individual hobby? But that really is any spare time I have is doing those activities with them, seeing what they're doing. I mean, and it's even amazing what you learn from them. My my first grader, the stuff she says that ties into the ESG space that I don't know where she's learning it, like, use little toilet paper, or you don't want to waste that. You got to turn the sinks off while brushing your teeth, that she's picking up already at that age. Just again goes back to Heidi, a point you made of how far ESG has come, right? Just even those topics and the vernacular of a first grader and how it connects to it. But no, it really is just time with them and the family and doing those activities. Trying to read and do other things that might be separate, but they typically don't get done.
Our little consumers of tomorrow. So
Yes.
we want to keep them happy. But enjoy Halloween now is my advice, because I only have my dog left to dress up and I miss those days. But
yeah.
Anyways, thank you, Susan. This has been fun and informative. I learned something every single time. I love your approach to things. I love, just the way you built on your history of claim mitigation and substantiation to build these amazing programs. So this concludes today's discussion. This webinar was recorded and will be available to view in our library of recordings on our YouTube channel. We encourage you to visit our YouTube channel and subscribe to stay up to date. We want to thank you so much for taking your time to attend today's program. A special deep thanks to Susan for your insights. I hope you will join me next month on November 16th. At that point, I'm going to chat with Kristen Campbell, who was the head of ESG at Huddle Worldwide and recently retired about a week ago. So we're all jealous of her, and we'll talk to her next time. So have a good rest of the week, and thank you, Susan.
Great. Thank you, Heidi. Thanks, everyone.